There is a taboo on male vulnerability which is ancient. It is the product of a time when the strict gender role for women was to raise children and make home, while it was the assumed responsibility of a man to provide resources and protection. In this time, a man who didn't want to work a dangerous job could not have provided the first, and a man who didn't want to fight a war could not provide the second. And so every society that succeeded only by shaming men who heeded their own sense of vulnerability. Emotions such as anger and pride, which could be applied to dominance, may have been permissible, but fear, sadness, guilt, grief, shame, anxiety were all best ignored. When we diminished a man's capacity for self-empathy, we diminished his capacity to empathize with others. We created a callous man. A man who could easily disregard the vulnerability of his enemy and strike him down, that much is true, but also a man who could conscience the domination of his own wife, his own employee, his own child. To what extent do we still do this today? It's a little known fact that boys receive on average 3 times as much physical punishment as little girls, and studies correlate frequency of physical punishment to the rate of domestic abuse. Baby boys are, on average, allowed to cry for longer without being comforted. As toddlers, they are told that big boys don't cry, and as adolescents, they're told to man up and take it. From the moment they hit the football field to find scantily clad cheerleaders encouraging them to risk spinal injury for applause in a way that objectifies each sex, they are being taught the lesson that in order to receive love, they must disregard their own well-being and the well-being of others who oppose them. This is backed up by the man's stereotypical gender role at work. Men succeed in gaining promotions by outcompeting other men. A prosecutor who says to the defense attorney, "That's a good point. We hadn't considered that. Can my client and I have a moment to discuss that point?" would make a terrible lawyer, but a wonderful partner. A man who hones the skill of interrupting and undermining his opponent excels in the courtroom and at the office. But if he brings these anti-social disciplines home to verbally abuse his wife and undermine the confidence of his children, he will make a terrible husband. The prison psychologist James Gilligan, husband of the famous feminist Carol Gilligan, found in his work with some of the most violent men in America, many of them domestic abusers as well as murderers, that what often motivated them to violence was an idea that they had internalized from their environment, that in order to be a man, you had to dominate in order to get respect. Prisoners said to him things like, "James, I never felt so much respect in my life as when I had a gun in my hand." Part of rehabilitating these criminals was to break down and recreate their own imagination of what manhood meant to them. Any campaign to make the home a safer place for women must encompass making vulnerability safe for men. The ultimate beneficiaries will be our children, who will have better fathers, happier mothers, the skills necessary to forge fulfilling, open, honest relationships, and the tools to forge new workplaces based on mutual empathy rather than one-man-upship and competition. A man's facade of strength is his greatest weakness.